In 2012, music creators suffered setbacks on the judicial, legislative, and business fronts. And I'm going to go through these in very broad strokes. We're not going to get into any specifics. If you have questions about it, I think we're going to have lots of time once the panel is up, and there'll be a Q&A afterwards. So please save your questions, and we can get into a little more detail if you want to. So this will be kind of just an overview of some of the things that we've been dealing with in the last 12 months. One of the first areas that we're going to talk about is judicial. There was a very important Supreme Court ruling in 2012 in regard to a large chunk of income that SOCAN was getting from digital sources and internet uses. Now, for many, many years, the regulatory body that has overseen copyright in Canada is the Copyright Board of Canada, logically enough. And the Copyright Board of Canada is actually, for the most part, I think, been a very good regulatory situation for music creators. They're very knowledgeable. It's people who specialize in copyright. It's very much like a court. What happens is that users of music come to the court, and so does SOCAN and other of the collectives, and in front of a panel of, I forget how many, is it 6 judges?
5.
5 judges, thanks. 5 judges will hear both sides and come to a determination about the kinds of revenues that should be generated and go to creators for various uses of our music. And again, these are knowledgeable people. This is a specialty. They do this every day, so they know what they're talking about. Well, in 2012, one of the cases, or one of the areas that they had determined much to our, or somewhat to our liking, went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically completely reversed decades of precedent in terms of how our revenue streams were generated and how they were divided. And in particular, the area was whether a digital download is also a performance. And of course, if it's a performance, then SOCAN would be included in the revenue stream. Because the Supreme Court ruled against SOCAN, SOCAN immediately lost something over $20 million, which it has to return to one of the biggest users of digital music, and that's Apple. So you could imagine that Apple needs $20 million, that's not even lunch money for the staff there. And I believe it's a loss of something like $7 million a year going forward. So again, many, many years of that income being received by SOCAN and distributed to music creators and other rights holders has gone away. So that's one of the the kind of keynotes of bad news, unfortunately, that we've had this year. There's a lot more in that decision, but again, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly just to give you an idea of what we've been facing. So as I said, SOCAN no longer collects tens of millions of dollars in revenue, $7 million a year, roughly. And this was just one other point I'll touch on the Supreme Court. This idea of users' rights has started to become an important factor in the decisions that are made. So, I mean, I think we all understand or have heard the word copyright. We understand that many of our rights, certainly in the Anglo-American world, are built on this idea of copyright. Also in Canada, we have a French fact and the French and a European kind of a more European approach to it, which is called authors' rights, droit d'auteur, which is also very important. And now we're finding increasingly that in legal circles and in legislation, as I'll see in a moment, there's a lot of talk about users' rights and the fact that the users' rights are there to balance against the rights of authors, the rights of creators. And I think a lot of people, again, who've been around for a long time kind of wonder, well, what are these user rights? Where did this come from? Do people who use music, who take music for nothing, for example, have the same bundle of rights that creators do? And if so, what does that mean exactly? And it's kind of problematic. It's troubling to think that users have rights that in some way are the equivalent and balance the rights of the people who make the music. So this is a new and kind of troubling situation. It's not like I just want to hasten to add that I obviously think that people who consume music should be treated fairly. And the S.A.C. for many years has felt that we shouldn't sue people and try to stop people from doing what they do. But this idea of users' rights is kind of now being used as a false equivalency, I guess is a good way to look at it, to the rights of creators. So on the legislative front, we had a new copyright bill, Bill C-11. And for many years, the S.A.C. worked with other organizations in the music industry to try to support some revenue streams that were not enormous revenue streams, but were helpful. One of them was the private copy levy. Another one was broadcast mechanicals. Again, we won't go into all the details about what was involved and what those rights entail, but they were revenue streams that were helpful. And the private copy levy still exists, but it will go down every year just by the fact that the levy itself is only on blank CDs. It wasn't extended to things like iPhones and USB keys and other kinds of media that can hold music. So although it still is in existence, it certainly is well understood by all parties that that's a revenue stream that is going down and will probably be it may be almost nothing now. I'm not up on the latest figures about what's bringing in, but it certainly is going down. Broadcast mechanicals, another, not a huge source of income, but music business is a business of nickels and dimes, and all of these different revenue streams by shrinking or going away are affecting our incomes, and not in a good way. On the business side, we've certainly heard a lot about streaming services lately. I was interested to read recently that the CBC streaming service took in, I hope I get these figures right, $65,000 in advertising revenue, and it cost $6 million to run it this year. So that's something like that. It was something in that order. We've heard a lot about Spotify. Is Spotify up in Canada yet? Is it running in Canada? Okay, well, it's supposed to be coming, right? There's still some conversation about it coming, but there are other ones. RDO? Yeah, okay. It's good to know that some of these services that are generating some revenue, such as Spotify, RDO, and others, are gaining some traction and are growing in the marketplace. The problem is that the revenue stream that is flowing through to music creators is so abysmally low that it's almost indistinguishable from nothing. So to give you an example, and some of this is based on statements that I've seen in my own statements, to get to the poverty level in Canada, you need something like, which is about $20,000 a year, you need something like 35 million streams. So you would need 35 million streams every year of the rest of your life in order to earn $20,000 as a songwriter, for example. Well, I think the biggest album of all time, Michael Jackson's Thriller, sold something like 30 million copies. So if you can imagine anyone actually writing a work that would generate 35 million streams a year for the rest of your life to achieve poverty level, I mean, that's pretty stark. Meanwhile, the gentleman who owns one of the partners in Spotify is now the second or third wealthiest man in England. So clearly it's a good business model for some people, and it is gaining some traction. But the fact of the matter is that very little of the revenue is trickling down to those of us who create the music. Well, retail outlets continue their decline. I think HMV, which was a huge force in Europe, you probably read about this in the papers this week, has just declared bankruptcy in Europe. I think HMV still exists here. I don't know, they probably sell more headphones than they sell anything else or something along those lines. But the fact of the matter is that retail is still in some form of collapse around the world. And repressive measures have, and why I say predictably, because again, the S.A.C. for many years has not supported some of the repressive measures. We've always felt that that licensing was a better way to go. We won't get into that right now, but I think the most significant thing to understand where we stand with piracy, and by the way, file sharing, which people don't talk about very much, a study last year in England, I think in the city of Manchester alone, in one quarter there were 43 million file shares. That was one city in England over a 3-month period. So there's still a lot of music file sharing going on. And this, of course, is the big news this week. I think they had something like 1 million subscribers in their first day of business. So Kim.com, the guy who was arrested some months ago, based, I think, in New Zealand or Australia, has reemerged after being arrested with a new service. It's called Mega, and it's kind of a club you join. It costs you nothing to join it. What it does is any content you want, whether it's music or movies or whatever, is encrypted on your before it goes up onto a storage server. You're given 50 gigabytes online for free. So it's encrypted before it goes into your locker, your online locker. At that point, you can share it with anybody you want to. So, and when you excuse me, when you sign up for Mega, you have to do one of those, things, terms of service, which say that you bear no that Mega bears no responsibility. This is all your own content. But the fact it's encrypted before you upload it means there's absolutely no way of knowing what you're uploading. And then you share with other people who've encrypted their content. So in point of fact, what they have now is what we've always feared for many years, which is a way of sharing where it's impossible to monitor what the content is and to what extent it's being monitored or what extent it's being shared. One of the advantages of file sharing as it has existed over the last few years was a company called Big Champagne, for example, and there are others in Los Angeles claimed that they could, and claimed with good reason, that they could give you 100% of the data. In other words, they knew exactly what songs were being file shared and in what quantity. And they could do it in a privacy compliant way. So the important thing there is that if you have that information, you can license the works, which is, again, something we've been talking about, and you can do distributions because you know what songs are being shared and you know in what numbers they're being shared, right? So you can do pro rata distributions and build a business model. Really what Mega represents is driving sharing underground and encrypting the information. So now it's kind of like the war on drugs. It just escalates and escalates, and we know less and less about what's going on. So we have, the tools that we have to try to turn it into a legitimate situation become increasingly difficult to use. So, whack-a-mole continues. I think this is a major escalation on the part of the moles, I guess you might say. But again, something like over 1 million people in the first day or so have joined this. So you can imagine, and this guy, he knows what he's doing. This is a declaration of war on the U.S. and other governments that, that have been giving him a hard time for the technology for sharing that he's introduced previously. So this is another, and if you're not suicidal yet, I'm sure we're getting close. This is a concern that some of us have been fighting, in the last or dealing with in the last few weeks, and that is that one of the healthiest revenue streams that still exist is the performing rights stream. In fact, a little bit of good news is in 2012, performing rights societies worldwide collected $10 billion worldwide for the first time. So the idea of collectivizing our rights and licensing our rights is a very robust model. It's been around for a long time, and while the record company revenues over the last decade or so have gone down significantly, 50%, something like that, performing rights royalties have gone up. So again, to my mind, the beauty of that system is we don't tell people what they can do. We have no control over the technology. We have no control over anything. All we do is monetize the activity. That's the beauty of performing rights societies, in my view. But as you might expect, as revenues everywhere else have gone down, mechanical revenues have decreased because of sales. Sales have dropped off. I think it's safe to say that some of the large corporations that operate in the music industry have looked at that revenue stream and kind of rubbed their hands and said, how do we get in on this? Because obviously there's, performing rights societies are still doing well, as I said. So we're seeing things like direct licensing where catalogs are being removed from performing rights societies so that They could be direct licenses. One of the new services that's supposed to be coming online shortly, that is probably driving a lot of this, is there's talk that there will be an iTunes streaming service launched sometime this year. So I think a lot of people feel that that will be the biggest service in the streaming world going forward, probably beat out Spotify and Pandora, and will generate significant revenues. So what I'm trying to get at is we may be seeing a move to some extent to dismantle performing rights societies, or certainly weaken them, and see that that revenue goes directly to publishing companies. So, I mean, I consider that to be something that we need to talk about, and that I think the collectivization of our rights has been a very successful model over 160 years or so now, and it's something that I think we lose at our peril. So that brings us really to the question, can the music business be saved, and if so, how? And I know your answer right now is absolutely not, and who cares anyway. So I'm going to end it there. As I said, it should be, I understand that we may have a very opposite viewpoint. I think we will be getting some opposite viewpoints from some of the panelists, but these are some of the things we faced in the last 12 months, and maybe, obviously, having gone through a 12-month period like that, it seems like it's a reasonable question to ask.